Do people choose their trauma?
Did I choose my trauma? Okay. Do I choose my trauma? Okay.
I can't recall everything in its sequential order. So I think we would have gone back to Nigeria, maybe I would have been 6, 7. It was always busy in the house. And because my auntie would joke that I was uncle's favourite girl, 30-year-old me does the math and says, well, if I was his favourite girl, that means he called on me quite a few times. And uncle came in and he knocked on the door and he said, Yemi, come. And I think I would have been about 7, 8. And in this incident, he called me into the living room. And I remember we had these brown chairs around the living room and the TV is on. I knew that that's where he slept when he came over to visit because he didn't live with us. And he would maybe do some small talk. And I remember that day I was wearing a dress. I'm pretty confident it was red wine. It had dots on it. And he would just talk, and then he would ask me to lie down on the chair. And at this point, I'm paralyzed.
What I would consider to be lived trauma is a person who has lived through a trauma themselves, who has experienced the trauma. So whether it be something like childhood sexual assault, or being beaten at home by their parents, or even things like extreme bullying in the schoolyard and things like that.
So there's really 2 forms of trauma. They've got shock trauma, which is like a car accident or a surgery. It's a one-off trauma that normally you would recover from, given 6 to 8 weeks. There would normally be a time lapse and you would recover. And then there's another kind of trauma known in the psychotherapy world as complex trauma, complex PTSD. And that comes from childhood neglect. It often happens in childhood, or abuse. So it's where you don't have a chance to recover because you're living in the situation where the trauma is.
It's funny, I tried to separate how I would have felt then and how I feel now, but I couldn't speak. I don't even recall saying, I don't want to do this. Maybe I did, I can't recall. And he would ask me to lie down, and then he would pull up my dress and he'd pull down my underwear, and then he would put his hands in and he would touch me, and he would be talking to me at the same time, asking me questions. He would then do that once we'd finished having that conversation. And this is where I block. And this is where I either ask people to use their imagination, because the one thing I do recall was just closing my eyes.
How sexual abuse shows up in children is... I felt quite emotional because I have a lot of experience with clients, and I've had my own personal abuse. So I feel physically, like emotionally, moved by your question. So how does sexual abuse show up in people later on? Yeah? Okay, so for a lot of people, they go into one or two things, and of course that's just generalizing. They go into either extreme avoidance, or they go into extreme love addiction, which is that kind of really trying to hang on, I'll do anything to make you love me. So there's no sense of boundary or self-value. There's no sense of, this person is not good for me, this relationship is not good for me. They have no sense of that because of the trauma has cut them away from getting the visceral information we normally would, which our bodies tells us that this is dangerous. When we've had trauma, we cut away from that, so we don't have that. So we go into the please love me, holding on to the person, and then the person's just abusing because we just have no regulator to monitor this is not right.
I definitely avoided acknowledging that trauma had happened to me. So between the age of 7, 8 to about my 30s, I would have gone on my life as normal. I don't know, all these things went in my head. So even though I didn't feel it held me down, I think it did. It changed my self-worth. Subconsciously, even though I come from a culture that's all about strength and warriors and all of that, and we are resilient people, there was still something about my lack of self-worth. And it was from that incident. So I wasn't aware that I had been sexually abused by my uncle until I was in my 30s, because I'd done a really good job of suppressing it. Now, I spoke about it when I was young. I'd have told I think one of my grandmums and even my auntie. I'm sure I told people. And, well, it didn't appear anything was done.
Trauma is almost always perpetrated by one person to another. Somebody else makes the choice to traumatize an individual, and unfortunately, the traumatized individual has to learn to live with the consequences of a choice that somebody else made for them. Sometimes behavior within relationships activates trauma that people believe that they had worked through. I think that most people don't come into a relationship aware of how their trauma may impact that system, and as a result, miss the signs that should have suggested, hey, you know what? My response to this behavior suggests that it's more than just this behavior, it may be something else.
Looking at the definition of trauma, I really like what Peter Levine, who is the father of somatic therapy, I like what he talks about when he says that trauma is when there is a threat or a perceived threat, and the body stiffens and contracts and tightens. The trauma is not out there. The trauma is inside the traumatized person.
I guess when I say get out, sometimes it's actually getting out of your head. I think for those who might still be reeling the effects of either sexual abuse or any other form of trauma, is to first figure out where your control is. My control was in my mind. You know, yes, I lived in Japan, I was in Nigeria, the UK, now I'm in Australia. On paper, I'm running away from something. But I realized it was my mind. And so figure out where you have control, and it's your mind, and it's to make the choice that an event will not define you to make you play small.
Working with children who've experienced trauma isn't my speciality, but I've worked with a lot of adults who have survived extreme trauma as children. And I know that what they experience as children continues as adults, and one of those things is disassociation, which is struggling to stay in your body when you're presented with any level of stress.
Does forgiveness play a part in healing? I usually like to answer questions really strong, but I don't know. I'm still new in the journey to that. I think if I saw my uncle today, there's a possibility I'm going to want to take him out. There's a possibility I'm going to want to fly kick him right there. That's what I think, but I don't know yet because I haven't seen him since my work and my awakening. But I think it does. I truly, people say it, forgiveness is about releasing yourself rather than anyone else.
Whenever I hear, oh, well, should you forgive your perpetrator? I think, I'm not 100% sure. Well, I think that's a person's individual choice. And as a therapist, I would never encourage them one way or the other. I would say, let's have a conversation so whatever choice you make, you can live with.
I think the reason why somebody would want to resolve their trauma, talk about their trauma, deal with their trauma, is because of this immense amount of locked away energy, this immobilization that is in the system. And so if you think about that being locked away, and again, we can go back to, an analogy of like a traumatized person body being like a soft drink bottle with its cap on that's been shaken and shaken. We wouldn't just, unscrew that cap because we'd get this explosion, but think of the energy that's actually locked there.
But it was when I was in my 30s and I was having a conversation with a sibling or something, and they said, Uncle David's here. He's in London. Oh, and he's looking after so and so. I just thought, fuck. Every single thing I had buried had come back to the surface like a tsunami. In June, July 2012, when I found out uncle was looking after, 5-year-old girl. Then I was not on my spiritual awakening journey, but I just remember hearing a voice saying, this is why you speak. This is why you speak. Because when you do not speak, you are erasing something that has happened. When you do not speak, you are erasing the emotions. And when you do not speak, you are not creating the avenue for somebody else to be seen, heard, and healed. My healing process started with, okay, Yemi, you're going to need to face this event. You're going to need to face your trauma. And the minute I did that meant that I started opening up, speaking to people that I trusted, going into circles. I'm not going to hide in the shadows anymore. I'm going to speak in the name of love for people to receive it. And I truly believe that that's my mission.
But I think it's important to remember that we need to work at an individual level to work at a group-based level.
And how we heal, I think, is individual for every single person. Everyone needs different things, So even though you've gone through all that, the healing allows all those golden pieces and allows more of you to come through.
I don't actually think that any group, any community, any culture loses out as a result of individuals coming into connection and resolving their trauma, or communities resolving their trauma. The good doesn't come from the traumatic experience. The good comes from resolving the traumatic experience.
I have the opportunity to support a lot of people who are working on healing their trauma and experiencing different symptoms. But there's nearly always a past life element and an element where the ancestors come in to support that person.
Why am I experiencing this trauma in this life? You have to find out what's the purpose of this trauma for me, who are as an experiencer. If you understand that, you will come out of it and you are healed.
So there's a lovely quote, which is trauma not transformed is transferred. Okay? So trauma not transferred is transformed. So the opportunity is, are you going to transform it? And how? So it's imperative that it's transformed, especially if you're planning to be a parent in any way. It's imperative it's transformed if you're going to interact with any other human in any way. Because as I say, hurt people hurt people.
What's the purpose? And of course, now I found my purpose is to heal.
I think trauma does play a role in shaping who we are. I'm almost reluctant to admit it, but it does. I truly believe there's probably 1 in 2 people, and I need to check my stats, that would have experienced trauma. And so for it to shape how we respond to life incidences, the relationships we form, makes sense. I don't want to say it defines us in terms of keeping us small, and that's part of the work that I do, is how can we shine in spite of the trauma, because it's all around us.
Did I choose my trauma? From a really basic physical, if I'm just thinking about the physical level, my answer would be no. Couldn't choose my trauma. I'm living on a physical plane. If I had to go more elevated and go emotionally, as in my astral field, did I choose my own trauma? I would say yes, to a certain extent, because some of my thinking contributed to the trauma, especially to the trauma still being in place. And then when I think of, from a spiritual perspective, did I choose my trauma? I would say 100% yes, and gladly so. Because choosing my trauma as a soul, knowing before I came into this body, I knew exactly all of the challenges, but I knew that those would shape me and make me the woman I am today, and I wouldn't change a thing.
Okay, so can we choose a particular traumatic experience so that we can have post-traumatic growth? So we actually have research around something that's called post-traumatic growth. It's a hashtag on Instagram, I found out last week. There's 30,000 posts under post-traumatic growth. So clearly that's a known thing in our culture, and it's a research thing as well. So yeah, we can have post-traumatic growth for sure.
Do people choose their trauma? The answer is nobody knows. Nobody knows. But ultimately, because trauma is perpetrated by someone else, I don't see how a person can make a choice for someone else I don't see why a person would make a choice for someone else that would directly disadvantage them.
Did I choose my trauma? Okay. Do I choose my trauma? Okay. Yes and no, because you want to, if you choose to believe in, there's a spiritual practice saying karma. If you choose to believe in karma, I didn't choose it. Of course, in this life, something suddenly happened with the shock and the pain that make your life hopeless. Life means nothing to you. It is so severe feeling that you carry those energy in your body. But if you believe in that karma comes in, actually give you a little bit of understanding of karma is like cause and effect.
Every morning I wake up, I tell my daughter, every morning we have a choice to be happy or not. I choose to be happy. Might still have a shit day, but it's a choice I make every single time. Did I choose my trauma? Did I choose my trauma? That's a twofold answer. On a physical level, no. Some people need it plain and simple. 7-year-old Yemi did not ask for her power to be taken. 7-year-old Yemi didn't ask to be silenced or to be ignored. On a spiritual level, in a past life, I believe I did choose my trauma. Because if I can sit here today and help guide other women and men who have gone through this type of trauma, then I would have been down for that. I can't experience what good looks like if I haven't experienced bad. I can't experience what freedom looks like if it's ever been taken away. And as painful and as wrong as it sounds, that's why in a previous life I would have chosen my trauma.